Welcome everyone to the first edition of Cap Wealth On. We are investing in what we call Studio 1A here at Cap Wealth, and to improve the audio visual quality of this, we are going to provide you with this content at least once a month, maybe in between. Grant Stark will join me as Director of Research from time to time. So we look forward to enhancing our communication with you on a regular basis. So today we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve 101. A lot is in the news about that. Chairman Powell just gave extensive communication on Capitol Hill last week. So we want to give you some basics so that you kind of understand what their challenges are and what their response is going to be, some of the current economic issues that we're facing. So start off, the Federal Reserve, their mission is to create monetary policy that fosters economic stability through full employment while they maintain acceptable levels of inflation. That's it. And one of the things that Chairman Powell focused on in his talks last week is the economic stability component of that. Well, that should give everybody some comfort, both in terms of the financial markets and what some of the geopolitical global uncertainty is right now, and how they are prepared to act to meet that leg of their mission. So what we'll do is we'll unpack that a little bit. And what I want to do is first go back to February of 2020. February of 2020, we had an environment where we had excess capacity all over the world. We need to remind ourselves of that. And we were in a very deflationary environment. And the Federal Reserve was targeting a 2% rate of inflation through the monetary policy that I just discussed. And they were having trouble getting there. And there's a key component in all of this that we need to understand, and it's the tools that they have in their toolbox. And I'm going to talk about the three most obvious that Chairman Powell talked about last week. But there's a saying, the Fed has an unlimited number of tools in the toolbox. So I'm going to add two of them that haven't been discussed that I think you will hear more and more about as time goes on and as this year unfolds. So the first tool in the toolbox, obviously, is interest rates. You raise interest rates, you make it more expensive to borrow, and that makes businesses think twice about economic expansion, and it puts some discipline into factoring in the cost of borrowing versus what companies are going to be able to generate in terms of profitability. That's what everybody's focused on right now. And you've heard everyone talk about 4 potential interest rate increases this year. Chairman Powell said, we're going to get a 1/4 point. They took a 1/2 point off the table. Again, they're trying to foster that level of economic stability and predictability that investors and business owners and planners can use when they are, trying to make decisions going forward. The second tool in the Fed toolbox is asset purchases. And you've heard a lot about that. The Fed was buying billions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities every month. They were buying corporate bonds. They were buying all sorts of financial assets in the financial crisis. Why? Well, because with the pandemic and crisis that ensued from that, the velocity of money, which is a very key component, it just stopped. And what do I mean by velocity of money? Well, if I could stack $1 billion into this room, that $1 billion does absolutely nothing for the economy unless someone comes in and they take out some of the money and they go buy some good or service, or they invest in a business, or they develop a piece of real estate. And so the velocity of money just came to a screeching halt, mainly driven by fear of the uncertainty of what was going to happen in the pandemic. So the Federal Reserve's response was, reduce interest rates. They went almost to zero. Buy bonds, buy financial assets. And when the Federal Reserve purchases these assets, they are putting money into the economy because like any other bank in the world, and it's the most incredible bank in the world, they don't have to create an offsetting liability. So they're printing money, buying an asset, and they're getting the return off of that asset while they do it. And then at the same time that they are buying those assets, they're building their balance sheet. And their balance sheet was up to over $5 trillion. And then the third tool in the toolbox, he said they're developing a plan to reduce the size of the balance sheet. And when they start selling those assets, they are essentially pulling the money out of the economy that they put in. Since February of 2020, they've increased the global money supply by 40%, which is extraordinary. Think about that. There's 40% more money in circulation since February of 2020 than ever existed. And so that created the problem that they're having to deal with now. He called it the reverse COVID effect, because all of a sudden that velocity of money picked up. People started spending again. And when they started spending, the supply chain, the goods and services that they weren't to purchase, that they delayed purchases on, or the effect of having that much money in circulation gave people a newfound form of freedom that potentially led to speculation and a lot of other financial assets. All of a sudden, you've got inflation out of control relative to what the acceptable level of inflation would be, given their mission to foster economic stability through maximizing employment and acceptable levels of inflation. So inflation went over 7%, and some measure it even higher. We had the largest increase in Social Security payments, I believe on record, 6.9% increase in Social Security payments, cost of living adjustment directly related to inflation. So there's two more tools that the Federal Reserve that they have in their toolbox now that I want to talk about. The first one is kind of a secondary effect of the first three, but I call it the wealth effect. When people feel wealthy, they spend money. And when they don't feel wealthy, they stop spending money. And when you have speculation like we had, and we talked about this for almost 2 years in our investment policy strategy, when you have the kind of speculation in the financial markets that was driven directly by this increase in 40% of the money that's out there, the opposite of that starts to happen. Prices start coming down as people pull in their horns. I've used Peloton as the poster child for this speculative excess. Peloton hit $186 a share back in July of last year. It's somewhere around $23 or $24 today. And it really has no hopes of ever reaching that $26 or $186 a share again. And one of the byproducts of this wealth effect was illustrated by the former CEO of Peloton. It was all over the New York news. He purchased a $55 million home in the Hamptons back in December. And he paid $2.5 million over the asking price. That's now on the market, and he's trying to sell it. And they were talking about how much money he was going to lose. So we've all had examples of that in our own backyard. They're not billionaires, but people were paying far more in excess of listing price, and the competition for homes. Again, not enough supply, too much demand, low interest rates, all the things that would foster people to go out and purchase homes. That wealth effect, with those financial assets declining in the speculative side of the market, will give the Fed some reason to pause as they go forward. The fifth tool that's in the Fed toolbox that I think you'll start to hear more about as we get through the year, and it'll be evident in Fed action, we're in the middle of the first geopolitical crisis that we've experienced since World War II. A lot has been written, a lot of published reports about what is going on in Ukraine and Russia. I'm not going to get into that part of it. But the impact of what is happening in Europe is also an additional driver of inflation. Ukraine exports 28% of all the wheat in the world. It is one of the largest producers of palladium and other rare earth type metals that are used in the EV space with electric vehicles and the conversion to a more carbon neutral global footprint. And so that inflation and the price of oil going to this morning over $120 a barrel, we've never had an oil shock and a shock of the type of like we've had experiencing right now that hasn't accompanied a recession, some more severe than others. And so the Federal Reserve is having to absorb, in addition to the problems that were created in February of 2020, the Federal Reserve is having to absorb all of this into their monetary policy. So what's the Fed going to do? Well, it's hard for me to tell you what the Fed's going to do because they don't know what they're going to do. They are very data driven, and that is what Chairman Powell said. They're going to respond to these current conditions and how current conditions evolve. And they're going to do that in a way that promotes economic stability. So if that means that the economy is grinding down, headed towards a recession by the end of the year, will we get 4 interest rate increases? Maybe not. If the global instability creates such a strength for the level of the dollar becomes so strong as a reserve currency at the expense of Europe, the Federal Reserve could start supporting those European currencies through purchases on their balance sheet at the same time that they're selling off other assets from their balance sheet. So I think one of the more foolish things that you can engage in is that type of predictive behavior. Everybody wants an answer, but there are no answers when you are the Federal Reserve and you are responding quarter to quarter to the problems that are created in monetary policy and executing their mission of economic stability. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. It's short, it's sweet. I've got an interview tonight with Bloomberg Radio. I'm going to reflect the same comments on Bloomberg Radio that I've told you this morning. We monitor all of those factors that I've outlined, and I have tremendous confidence in the Fed. They have great leadership. They have great data. They have data that we don't see and we don't have access to until after the fact. So they're very proactive in how they are approaching this. Is there going to be a period of instability? Yes. We're prepared for that. We invest defensively. We play defense. And whereas your accounts underperformed last year, for example, when NASDAQ was up 26%, well, NASDAQ is down almost 20% as of this taping. And you can see that there are a lot of issues with that. Whereas we promoted more economic stability through companies that have sustainable earnings and profits that are not dependent on heavy borrowing, that pay out dividends. And so those companies are going to be fine. They're productive assets. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Next month, we'll talk about some of the specific areas that we have, how we've executed our own investment policy to respond to these external factors in the world. Grant Stark will join me, and we'll have a discussion about how and what we've done in the first quarter and how we're going to continue to approach investing your hard-earned money and the money that you have safeguarded for us, with us, for the generations to come. Well, thank you for joining me on this inaugural edition of Cap Wealth On. We look forward to communicating regularly with you in this format in the months and years to come.